Shipton Road to form 9 apartments, and then the development of the grounds.
Sorry, there's been an issue with the last year. Can you restart from the beginning, please? I'm very sorry about that. Just, yeah, start from the top. My apologies.
Hello and welcome everybody to today's meeting of the Area Planning Subcommittee. My name is Councillor Hollier. I'm the chair of the committee, and regular viewers will notice we've got 7 rather than our usual 11, and we're hoping the other 4 will be able to join us for the next meeting, or at least the meeting after that. We've just got 1 item on the agenda today, so I think we can move straight on to the agenda. We're going to ask if members have any declarations of interest. No? The minutes of the last meeting, if we're happy for me to sign, if we could just give me a nod or yeah, that's great. And I'll note as well that the minutes of the March meeting, which should have been with this pack, we're still waiting for, but yeah, hopefully will come next time. We've got no speakers under the general public participation remit of the committee, so happy to move straight on to the plans list. And our first and only item today is Beverley House, Shipton Road. So Gareth, if you're able to give us an update.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a planning application for the part demolition and conversion of Beverley House on Shipton Road in Clifton. It forms 9 apartments, and there's also development in the gardens of the property to develop 3 residential buildings. There is an update to the report. There's a correction in paragraph 5.56 where it refers to the loss of a pair of category B trees, reference T10 and T11. It's just to clarify that the revised drawing retains the tree T11. I can point that out on the drawings when we get there. So there's a presentation as usual. There's the block plan with Shipton Road, Ousley development, Beechwood Close, which I believe is a hotel, which is currently vacant. There's a residential detached house in the back there, known as 19A Shipton Road. The development is in the Clifton conservation area. The existing site plan showing the grounds to the rear, car park, trees on the frontage. The building as it exists at the moment. So only this central section is the original Victorian building. This wing was built in the 1980s. The front of this wing was also built in the 1980s and the rear constructed in the 1970s. Further elevations and that proposed site plan. So this is Beverley House with the 1980 wing demolished. As I said before, 9 apartments in Beverley House. Building A, a 3-story building, provides 5 apartments. Building B, which is 2-story, provides 6, and there's 1 apartment, cycle and bin stores in building C, the small secure cycle store on the front there. Demolition plan, the ground floor. Lower ground floor plan, there is a basement in Beverley House, and that will be converted into 1 apartment. You can see it's light well and its own terrace at the rear there. Ground floor, first floor, second floor, and the roof plan. Proposed elevations, so this is Shipton Road elevation. This is the elevation that you would see from Homestead Park car park. This is the elevation along the flank with number 19. It's the elevation which backs onto Homestead Park. It's the garden elevation of block A and the garden elevation of block B. Sections through the site showing the small single-story building in section there. And again, shows some alterations at roof level. At the moment, the central section of the roof has a flat roof which links the two former pitches, and that will be extended to provide more accommodation in the roof. Although there will be a gap left to the end, so you can still read that that pitch roof both here and here. This is a typical bay detail of the new development. So buff brick, some detailing in the brickwork, and vertical timber cladding. Shows some recessed balconies as well. And I show this because this is the secure cycle store. It's on the frontage, so at the entrance to the site, and they've used it as a location to put the name of the site in there, where it backs onto the vehicle entrance. So photographs. This is a photograph from Shipton Road, also from Shipton Road, but further northwards. That is Beechwood Close, number 19, and this is the rear of the site. It's the rear garden. There's a hedgerow here, but members can just see through there. You can see a fence. That's the actual rear. There's another couple of meters beyond that hedge before you get to the fence, which is the boundary with Homestead Park and the redundant tennis courts. And here's the view from Homestead Park car park. Here's the entrance from Shipton Road. This is the 1980s wing, which is to be demolished. There's a brick-built store, which is also to be demolished. This cypress tree is retained, so that gives a good reference point to where that new building A will be developed up to. And an aerial photograph taken from the design and access statement. Again, the building to be demolished there. Trees on the frontage, and Beverley House. That's the end of the presentation. Are there any slides that members wish me to go back to?
Thank you. Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. Just actually on this picture, it's a good one to see the flat roof extension. So am I reading it right that the central bit that we can see there, where it's joined between the two eaves, essentially just extends out towards each end of the building, leaving a gap with about a metre or so of roof slope on either side?
Yeah,
is that approximately right?
That's correct.
And the Civic Trust was suggesting that it might be more sympathetic if there was an angle to that flat roof extension. Have I read it right that essentially what they're suggesting is that rather than it being a flat roof extension, it would have a pitch to it along that whole length? Is that what they were asking for essentially?
I think the suggestion, I'll just go back to the slide. It's probably best shown in one of the sections. Yeah, so it goes up to the new extended roof goes up to there. So there's still that the two pitched roofs, the two ridges are still can still be read from views. Although in straight on views, where you can get those straight on views, you will see this here. So this section sitting in between those two gables set back. Yeah, so this section shows it. My reading of the Civics Trust comments is they thought that bit should be angled.
Right.
Angled
So on
backwards.
each end, it would
So you'd be
slope
creating
rather than
it's like
being
a
a vertical.
mansard effect. The Case Officer Conservation Officer didn't feel that was particularly necessary.
No, that's helpful. I just wanted to understand what their comment had
Well,
meant,
that's my
because I didn't think it was
reading
particularly
of their
clear.
comment. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I did have a second question, if that's okay.
Yeah,
unless
sure,
anybody
go
else-
ahead.
It was just about the number of mobility parking spaces, because the highways comment, just note is paragraph 3.20 on page 23, talks about reduced mobility parking spaces, and I think elsewhere in the report it says there are just 2, and obviously with this being effectively I don't want to say older persons because it's an over 55s, but I've sort of understood it as being a development that people might retire to and grow old in. And I wondered what the policy was around mobility spaces, because 2 seemed like it might not necessarily be a sufficient amount, given what the site is, how the site is likely to be occupied.
Yes. If you leave that one with me for now.
Okay. Are there any further questions? Councillor Fisher?
Thank you, Chair. I was interested in the point 554 about the mature trees on the front and the risk of damage to them, even with the porous no-dig method of construction. I noticed those trees don't have a TPO. Is it within the remit of this committee to recommend that they be actually given the TPO? Because when I visited the site, I cannot underestimate how those add to the streetscape. They're absolutely beautiful, superb trees, and they give a nice leafy approach to that part of Clifton. Could we pursue the possibility of getting those trees covered by TPO so that if anything happens to them in the future, they could be replaced?
We can take that back to the design conservation manager. Yes, I mean they're protected in terms of their conservation area status, but they can be. I can take that back to him and recommend it.
As we know in Strensall, being in a conservation area doesn't protect trees from being cut down, unfortunately, and I want to try and preserve those and make sure they are kept safe for posterity.
Councillor Cracker?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I also had a couple of questions about the trees. At paragraph 3.12 on page 22, there's some description about I think the biggest concern is about the 4 trees that will be retained, but as Councillor Fisher referred to 2 of them at the front. But the wording is there is still a residual risk of harm despite the various measures that are in the arboricultural report. And I just wondered if you can say anything else to help us to understand what, how significant that residual risk of harm is. I know it might be a bit difficult, but can you help us to understand how likely that is, and is perhaps different for the 2 trees at the front compared to the 2 at the back? They're in a different sort of situation.
I think the comment is on the basis that there will always be a risk with trees in construction zones. That's the I think that's the issue that the landscape architect is raising there, and we can try and mitigate against that risk by the imposition of conditions and the no dig construction methods, the arboricultural, the construction method statements, things like that, to protect them as best we can. The risk to the trees post construction is really one of, similar to any other situation where you've got trees in close proximity to buildings. They will require trimming and maintenance, and sometimes we find pressures to reduce or to remove trees in those circumstances. But what I would say here is certainly the trees at the back that are being retained, they are largely to the flank of the buildings, so they're not directly in front of people's living room windows and things like that.
Okay, so just to follow that up, is the intention that the car park area will be kind of used as a construction area? Is that part of the issue, that because the site is going to be very tight, as many of these sites are, that the car park at the front will need to be used as a kind of construction base? And is that the worry? Because I think there's some wording somewhere about the worry from actual construction.
I would imagine that it will be used as a part of the construction compound, although there is, I suppose it depends on the time of the year, but there is the Homestead Park car park on the frontage, which appears from the site plans to have an access from here. So I don't know if historically it was used for parking for the offices before they were vacated, but that might be an option for the construction compound as well, potentially.
Is it possible to include that as a reference in a condition or as part of the CEMP? Because that is an issue that's coming up in all kinds of sites, that there really is a need for an off-site base for the construction compound. And particularly in this case, with reference to the trees, it does sound like it would be a good idea. We couldn't condition it because it's not, as far as I'm aware, it's not part of the ownership of the applicant. I just mentioned that it looked from the submission drawings that it had once formed a parcel with this site. I mean, having that hard surfaced area at the front, it already exists as a hard surface. I guess is preferable to having to create a new hard surface in and around trees. So there's already that tarmacked apron in front of the building that they can use without creating additional hard surface. But apart from the construction, the various conditions about the methodology and the tree protection measures up front and making sure that they are put in place, I think that's as far as we can probably go.
Thank you, Chair. Clearly, the committee has concern about the impact and potential impact on the trees with this application. So I guess the question is, are we doing everything that we can? To what degree are you satisfied that the mitigation measures proposed are adequate to the purpose? Is there anything more that would be available to us that would enable us to feel even more confident about the protection of these trees?
My view is the trees, the protection, the conditions that are in there are sufficient. I'm struggling to think of how you could if there's anything else you could do. I think what would take away the comments that members have made when the submission comes in terms of the requirement to protect the trees. We look very carefully at what they're proposing.
Okay. So, Councillor Crawshaw.
Sorry, just a further question on that point. So paragraph 5.99 on page 47 says the proposals include significant tree replacement on site. But I couldn't see any details about what is meant by significant tree replacement. I think there's about 14 or 15 trees that get lost. So is it that we're expecting 14 or 15 trees to be replaced? And I guess perhaps adding on to Councillor Cullick's point, I did wonder whether on condition 12 we could perhaps add an informative to that end. You know, that's the condition around landscaping and whatever, and we could maybe just say there's a desire to see at least the same number of trees as removed be replaced, because I thought significant was perhaps just a little bit ambiguous.
We can certainly add that as an informative.
Can't see any further questions. Can't see any further questions. I've got one just on 4.1. Would it be possible just to clarify? I think there's probably a couple of words just missing. In total, there have been 13 letters of support, which some concerns expressed from 11 respondents. Is that of those 13 letters of support, 11 included some concerns, or were there also 11 sort of letters of objection?
No, I think that having read all the letters, there are 13 letters, but from 11 different people.
Okay.
So there's more than one letter from a couple of people. And some of them raise concerns, largely the neighbour at 19A in respect of the trees near their boundary, side-facing windows, car parking levels, that sort of thing.
Yeah, then I can't see any further questions at this point, so I think we can move on to our public speaker, if he's available.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
I can, Chair. Thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, if you could just briefly introduce yourself, please. Sorry, I've not got the your names.
My name is Killian Gallagher.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, you'll know you've got 3 minutes to address the committee, and if you want to start in your own time.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Killian Gallagher. I am a planning consultant and the agent for this application. I'm accompanied by Mark Andrews of Vincent & Brown, who is the lead project architect. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. The proposed development is for the provision of residential accommodation for the over 55s. The application site is, we believe, an ideal location for this type of development. Development will also help to free up family housing in the city when residents move here. We have worked closely with your officers to get to this point. The design before you is the product of lengthy discussions with your planning and conservation team. We have redesigned the scheme and reduced the number of units proposed in order to reach a point whereby we have the support of building conservation. We would like to thank the planning and conservation officers for working with us to get to this point whereby we have a recommendation to approve. The starting point with the design was a desire to retain Beverley House itself, which we recognise contributes to the street scene and the character of the area. We then sought to sensitively introduce elements of new build to the building's curtilage. The application was well received by the local community and statutory consultees. In addition, we believe we have a scheme which is fully policy compliant. I can confirm that we are happy to have all car parking spaces, including the visitor spaces, fitted with electric vehicle charging points. The intention with this project is to meet or exceed the Council's sustainability policies at CC1 and CC2. This is secured via planning condition. On behalf of the applicant, I respectfully request that you consider approving the application today in line with officer recommendation. Mark and I are happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. And I'll just ask if the committee have got any questions. We just indicate. Councillor Crawshaw.
Thanks, Chair. It was just a question, you may have heard me raise the question about disabled parking spaces, and I just wondered if you had any conversations internally about whether you thought that the provision was sufficient. I understand there'll be a balance between the amount of space that's available for parking in general, but as I say, if my understanding of what this development is about is correct, is that it'll be somewhere that people would go to grow old in. 2 spaces, one of which is a visitor space. I just wondered whether that was perhaps on the low side for the size of the development.
Councillor, if I could hand this one to Mark Andrews, the project architect.
Hi there, Councillor Crawshaw. So we had sort of extensive discussions with highways and with the landscape officer, because that's sort of as well. The original scheme, we reduced the amount of parking spaces at the front of the development in order to actually reduce the pressure on the root protection areas of some of the trees that have been sort of mentioned already in the. In terms of the numbers, we are policy compliant. There are 2 spaces that are oversized. All the other spaces that are provided were calculated sort of in agreement with highway.
Thank you.
I think I got that. It's a very surreal experience hearing your voices coming down from the air. But I think I got what you were saying. Thank you.
I think I heard the words policy compliant, which is probably as much as we can hope for. Any further questions? I can't see any at this time, so yeah, I'll thank you for your time this evening, and yeah, you'll be able to continue watching on the council's YouTube channel. Thank you.
Very much.
Right, are there any further questions for Gareth? Can't see any, so we're happy then to move into debate, and if anybody would like to.
Sorry, Chair.
Sorry?
It's sitting so far away, it's difficult to attract your attention. I just something to add on the disability mobility parking. The standards in our local plan for residential don't actually contain a standard for a wheelchair accessible space. We do have standards where the standards exist. That's for 5%, so this would be compliant with that 5%. The numbers were reduced, but that was side by side with reducing the number of units when we sought revisions to the scheme.
Okay, thank you. So I think we are now happy to move into debate, and Councillor Colwick.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to move approval of this. I think it's encouraging to see a building which has not been in use for so many years being brought back into use, and being brought back into use for a purpose for which there's clearly a demonstrable need in the city. Good to see that care has been taken in terms of its location within the conservation area. I think in moving approval, I would want to underline comments made earlier about the protection of trees and doing everything we can, and the informative that was mentioned, I think, ought to be included. But I would certainly be happy to support this.
Thank you. Is anybody willing to second? No. Councillor Crawshaw.
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to second that on balance. I think, as Councillor Cullick says, it's good to see a building being brought back into use, and it looks to be a reasonably sympathetic design. I think the loss of trees on the site is a shame, but also I think that you can't develop things without losing some trees, and so long as they're replacing that same number of trees and possibly more, that would be even better. The only other thought I'd had, I think it's really positive that they're looking at all of the spaces being electric charging points. I think that's really good, and I'd like to see more of that with similar sized developments coming forward. And then the only other thing I think we just need to note is the bats, because I think that it does say that there's a colony that's of regional importance. I'm satisfied that the conditions are strong enough to cover that, and obviously hope that any temporary impact is only temporary and doesn't damage the viability of that colony. But as I say, otherwise, I think all things considered, it's good to see the site being developed in this way.
Thank you. Any further comments? Councillor Crackhill.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm still not quite sure what I'm going to do, but I may abstain on this simply because of the trees, and I'll come back to that in a second. I think there's a lot, obviously there are a lot of benefits to this, as Councillor Crawshaw has alluded to. There is meeting a need for over 55s housing. It would be nice to have more affordable housing on site, but its government policy means that we can't do that. And we are getting the commuted some. It's in a good sustainable location, and I think a lot has been done so that it mitigates any harm to it mitigates much of the harm to the conservation area. It's bringing an empty building back into use. It's also meeting CC1 and CC2 on climate change, which is not as high as we'd like it to be. But I do note, I think you've changed the wording of the condition, which I think is good. I think there's a much better wording on that condition now, which is very helpful, at least. But I am still concerned about the trees, and I know you have to take trees down. You would have to take some trees down to do a development like this. You often do on a site like this. But it's really the mature trees, the semi-mature and mature trees that are still under risk. And I just think we have to consider, in terms of our policies, that we need to go a bit further on this now in the context of our climate change policies, because it is those trees, not small replacement trees, that are going to absorb the carbon over the next 10 years towards a zero carbon city. So I just think we may have to consider that a bit further in future applications. It says that the paper says that in order to tackle this, the development would have to be a bit smaller. And obviously that's challenging, but I do think it's something we're going to have to look at in future. So I may abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Ware.
Thank you, Chair. I disagree slightly with Councillor Crawshaw. I'm not certain I would call this a sympathetic design, and I think I would really struggle to call it a sympathetic design if it wasn't adjacent to the Ouseley development. And I think if you take that Ouseley development away, which we haven't sort of spoke about, but that is a 1960s development. If you were to take that off this street, then I really think we would struggle to get this passed, because it is a dramatic change to this building, and doesn't necessarily match at all with anything else, as I say, apart from the Ouseley development. I can see the benefits of this scheme, I really can. And as people have said, it's bringing a building back into use that has really, really struggled to find use. But in doing this, we're at the same time damaging the look and the architecture of a very, very acceptable building in that area. And it is just a shame. And I don't like the look of it, and I can understand how that is personal, but really, it is something you have to consider on the planning balance. Are we changing the look of that streetscape? Are we changing the look of that development? How are we doing that? And is that, on balance, worth it? It's a point that I just wanted to make.
Okay. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. I take exactly what Councillor Webb's saying, but the fact is that Barleyfields and Ouseley exist. They've been there 50 years. I used to live in one of them for about 3 months when I first started teaching, and they've been there a long time. They're part of the streetscape, and these are, in my view, considerably superior in terms of the design to those two particular rather bland and uninteresting 60s developments. So I don't think we can refuse on that. The main thing is that Beverley House has been brought back into use. I visited it on the way to this meeting. I went and had a look around. It is becoming dilapidated. There's a risk if it doesn't get redeveloped fairly soon, we don't find a use for it. it will end up in a state where it cannot be brought back into use. And it's a very fine building. I'm amazed, I couldn't believe it when I realised that the extension to the northwest was an add-on. It's beautifully added. The one to the south that's been demolished is less sympathetic. It's well done, but it can go. It's not a particularly great addition. In my view, this is a good scheme. It's not 100% perfect, but I think it's about as good as we can seriously expect on this site. So I'm actually supporting it.
Thank you. And Councillor Perry.
Thanks, Chair. I wanted to agree with some of the concerns that Councillor Craggill had raised around the affordable housing, and I acknowledge that it couldn't happen on site and that our hands were tied there, but it is always good to know that there is affordable housing in situ. I think it really does address a need for over 55s accommodation. I think it would help, you know, to help people downsize sorry, I'm getting tongue-tied, to downsize size their properties to meet the needs for themselves in the future, and it frees up more family homes, which we know is an urgent need in the city. I think the informative on trees does help assure me, as do the conditions around the back colony, that we are taking steps to protect the environment around it. And while I can sympathise with some of the comments around the design, it does tick a lot of boxes for things that we need. So I'm minded to approve this one.
Okay, thank you. I can't see any further comments at this point, so I think we can move to the vote, and I think we'd probably be happy to know we can do a show of hands. So Gareth, are you able to give us a brief sort of summary of where we are?
Thank you, Chair. So it's been moved that permission be granted, subject to the prior completion of a Section 106 agreement and the conditions set out in Section 7 of the report. And there was an additional informative regarding the tree replacement to at least match the removal.
Sorry. I think that's it. Okay, fantastic. So then if I could ask if all those in favour, show. Any against? And abstentions? Okay, so that's approved. So that being our one item today, I think we can draw the meeting to a close. So I'll just, you know, a real heartfelt thank you, I think, to all the staff that have made this possible and have sort of created a safe space for us all. I know there's a good deal of anxiety about sort of move back to in-person meetings, and yeah, just a huge thank you to everybody that's put in a huge amount of work. So with that, thank you.